Good afternoon. This is day 5 and I feel like I'm starting to finally get into a rhythm on this diet. Right, so here we are. This is day 3, breakfast. We have some acorn gruel that I just put a tablespoon of blackberry vinegar and 2 tablespoons of fermented birch sap syrup. Now this came out quite well. There's about a cup of acorn flour in here. Slightly bitter, but not too much. There's also 1/4 cup of pendulous sedge flour, and there is a sprinkle of common hogweed powder and a tablespoon of badger fat. I could really use a good chunk of honey in here, and that would really bring the flavour out, but unfortunately we are rationed to 1 jar of honey a month, just to mimic what's available this time of year. So I'm savouring my honey ration and just dealing with this with the slight bitterness that the acorn provides, but it's not as bitter as my failed experiment the other day with the catkin flour, so it's good enough. Right, so this little bit of kit is my survivor filter. Now this is something that that you just buy on Amazon, but how this works is that it runs off just AA batteries, or you can plug it into a USB device. You've got this filter at the end which filters out most of the sediment, and then it also runs through a carbon filter and microfiltration, which takes out any bacteria and viruses or things like that. I made it into this shelter that I used to use for when I used to run laser tag here. Now it's still here. It's one of the bunkers, and it started raining, so I just wanted to get out of the rain. I was going to get my wild garlic and stream water, but yeah, so today's been relatively okay for most of it. I've been reducing birch sap down a lot, more birch syrup. I've got a lot to do, and I hope this rain doesn't put out the fire because I'm still reducing it down. Now bitters in the wild are actually quite common. There's a lot of bitter greens, and it's something that's been bred out of cultivated things like your lettuce and other greens that we eat on a daily basis. Now bitter foods are actually quite important, it turns out. They support our digestive system, they nourish the gut microbiome, which is quite good considering this is the type of project that we're on with the Wild Biome project. We're aiming to see how our guts behave on wild food, and I suspect because of all the bitters that it is going to be, as this says, very nourished, and that's maybe why my hunger and my body's been okay despite the bitter foods and the not so much food. And it also helps to keep hunger at bay, which kind of makes sense. I haven't felt that hungry today, and all I've been eating is the porridge. I'm going to have a mushroom broth for dinner, using the broth that I made from the venison bones. Now I've got the rabbit stock on at the moment from the rabbit yesterday. I'm reducing that down into a different broth that I will continue to use by just adding greens, adding mushrooms at the end of the day. It's just a nice feast that's easy to make. Bitter foods also bolster kidney function, and they support nutrient absorption. So that's actually quite fascinating, don't you think? That nature seems to have got it right. We've got a lot of bitterness in nature, and in modern foods we've got a lot of sugars, we've got a lot of salts, we've got a lot of the wrong fats, but not enough bitter. So this is my supper for day 3 of the wild biome project. This is a wild rabbit stew from the rabbit that I hunted yesterday. The leftovers that I couldn't eat, they were put in a broth in a slow cooker overnight. And then I have the venison broth from a few days ago. And in there are some saffron milk caps, some babeleets, some scarlatinas, and some slippery jack mushrooms. I have some wild garlic, some nettles, some cow parsley, and a sprinkle of kelp seaweed powder. It smells delicious. Taste test. Oh, that is absolutely gorgeous. That is the best stew yet. That must have come from roasting the rabbit over the fire and then boiling it down into a stock overnight. You can see in the previous clips the porridge that I made on day 2 and the stew in the evening. Now the stew was quite good. It was a little bit salty, so I altered that on day 4. I didn't add extra salt to it, but roasting the rabbit over the fire was the perfect decision for turning it into a broth. And if I do catch another rabbit, that will be the same thing that I do again. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling satisfied. And I'm feeling a lot more connected to not only everything around me, but my own body. I was always connected to it to some degree, and I'm quite a sensory person, so I've always listened to my body, but I feel now that I may have slipped away from that a little bit, and this wild food diet is zeroing back in that kind of balance. But not having to eat the bigger portions or drink as much milk as I used to do, my body isn't starving. It's far from starving. It feels nourished, very nourished. Now on day 3 I made a variation of the acorn porridge. Day 2 it was a little bit bitter because I used 100% acorn flour to do it, but I had this crazy thought. Just before the project started, I saw that there was still some reed mace, or cattail you might know it by, or bulrush. There was a lot of seed fluff still hanging off the stems by the little pond, and I took the opportunity to gather all of that and put it in my dry store. And after blitzing it down, I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. Worst case, it's going to remain fluff, but to my surprise, it was still a little bit fluffy, but it blitzed right down into a usable flour. Now, all the parts of reed mace are edible. You can get the root to turn into a flour, you can eat the bottoms of the young shoots as they start coming up, and you can use the seed heads. And I'd never really thought about this before, because the only video I've really found about someone using reed mace seed was trying to make muffins without blitzing them, and from the expression, it wasn't the most delicious result. But blitzing really does make a huge difference, and it becomes a usable flour, a usable bulking agent. Now it works really well in the porridge because reed mace flour has a neutral flavour to it, so it balanced out the bitterness in the acorn flour. So day 3 I mixed it with some, I used a quarter cup, or did I use half a cup? I think I used half a cup of acorn flour and half a cup of reed mace flour, and you just put a cup of water into there, boil it up. So for dinner on day 4 I used one of my organic free range rations because we're not allowed to harvest wild eggs in the UK, so we've been given a ration of organic free range eggs at 4 per week. So that is what I have to eat. I'm probably not going to eat 4 every week because I don't really eat eggs that much anyway, but for dinner I had the craving to make some wild garlic and nettle acorn cakes with the egg to bind it, and I sprinkled a little hogweed seed and sea salt in there and fried them in venison tallow, and they came out, as you can see in the video there, they absolutely look gorgeous and they tasted amazing too. So that was a much needed meal after 2 days of reducing birch syrup. I've reduced 85 litres down to about 4 litres and the birch are still giving, so I'm going to keep reducing that whenever I gather more, and I should hopefully hit my 100 litre quota to give me a litre of extra birch sap syrup, which is going to be one of my only sugar sources during this wild food diet. So after about 2 or 3 days of drying the pemmican, I used some venison and pheasant meat cut thinly, as you can see on day 2. I cut it all up and I left it in the dehydrator going. I wasn't in a rush to process it, and today I blitzed it all up into a fine mixture, and then you weigh that and you match the weight of the dried powdered meat to the same weight in tallow or any kind of fat that you're using. But I use venison tallow from Ethical Game, who amazing. They've got me another 2 kilograms or 3 kilograms at least, because I can't hunt deer here. I don't have the right guns, so I'm getting some wild venison tallow again from them. But that's going to go into my pemmican, and so yes, once you've matched the meat and the fat, if the mixture is still too moist, you can bulk it up with dried acorn flour, dried berries. Now usually they add berries into this mixture, and that's what I wish I had, and then I realised afterwards that I did have some blackberry leather that I'd forgotten about, so I'm probably going to use that when I go down to Southampton in a week or so. I'm going to make some pemmican and add some of that in it, and but yeah, traditionally they use dried berries to add into the pemmican, so you had a balance of the dried carbohydrates, fats, and you had the proteins. And yeah, it's an absolutely amazing staple. Just a 65-gram piece of pemmican will give you about just under 300 calories. Now that is a lot of energy in a small packet size. Such a beautiful day, the sun shining, and the birds are making lots of noise. Now the interesting thing is being able to do this diet whilst living a modern life, because hunter-gatherers spent 24/7 trying to get everything they needed to survive, and some of the foragers on this experiment they're working a 9 till 5 job on top of foraging, or some of them have got foraging courses booked and they're teaching a lot. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can keep up this routine. And that's all from me for now. End of day 5. But yes, things are going smoothly and I feel amazing. I really do.